in order to truly become great in your vocal technique, in order to learn to bridge and connect, and to really dial in and focus on your training, it's absolutely critical that the student of extreme singing techniques understands where, in relation to the piano, or where in their voice, the bridging happens between chest voice and head voice. In other words, in a sense, where is the passaggio? And it's very helpful to your training and will accelerate your progress if you kind of know where that is. Now, men and women have a passaggio between the two registers. They sit at slightly different places. So first, let's just take a look at that. Ladies first. For women, the passaggio tends to sit somewhere around, it's not any one specific note, but it would be a general region, would tend to be around B flat, B, C5. Now this is B flat 4, B4, C5, C sharp 5. For men, our passaggio and bridging happens between the chest voice and the head voice somewhere around D4, D sharp 4, E4, these three notes right here. Now, you hear me adding the 4, the number to it. Some folks might not understand what that means, and it's important that we clarify it. It's quite a simple thing to understand. The number is referring to the octave, the number of octave as related to the piano. So in North America, what we do is we count up the fourth. If it were a C4, for example, this is the note C4. In North America, we find C4 by counting up 4 octaves, 4 Cs from the lowest note, left side of the piano, up. So that's C1, C2, C3, C4, and C5. Now, for men and, generally speaking, women, most of the action in singing happens between C3, C4, C5. And of course, you can get up here into, the higher C5 octave range for your super high notes. Now, for men, the most difficult notes in your singing voice, the most difficult notes to train, are not the super high screamy notes. The audience thinks that's the case. Most people think that the really super high scream is the most difficult note because it sounds important and it sounds impressive. But students of vocal technique training understand that that's not the case. Certainly my students at TVS understand that's not the case. The most difficult notes in your range are the low head tone notes. They're the most difficult to train and to phonate. One reason for that is because when we sing a low head tone, it's really hard to get compression. And when I say compression, I'm referring to it's difficult to bring the vocal folds together, to close the glottis, to close the space between the vocal folds, to remove the windiness of falsetto. Okay? Now it's our exotic vocal mode twang that helps us to get the compression. It assists in getting the vocal fold closure in the head voice. Nonetheless, the notes in the low head voice are the most difficult to sing and train. For men, those notes would be, sometimes at TVS we affectionately call it the money notes, because not only are they the most difficult notes to train and to learn, but go figure, they're the tastiest notes. They're the ones that you really want the most. So the most difficult notes for men tend to sit right around D sharp, E, F, 4, F sharp 4, G4, and G sharp 4. Now the other interesting thing about this particular group of notes, from approximately, we'll say approximately D4 to G sharp 4, these notes right here are your low head tones. And these notes right here also happen to be the notes that we're trying to use our covering technique with. As you recall, in an earlier tutorial, we were talking about covering. How the low head tones, we try to make the low head tone notes, pitches, sound like a high chesty belt. We want to create the illusion to the audience that our low head voice is actually a chesty belt, when in fact it's not. We're twanging in the head voice through dark vowels. And when we roll up to an E, may, or an F4, may, or an F sharp 4, may, we are covering. So, just referring back to that previous covering video that we did, again, approximately from D4 to G sharp 4, these low head tones, these are also the notes that you're going to cover. You're going to roll up to these notes into a darker A vowel. Okay? And they feel, when you're covering, kind of interesting, exotic. They fit low, back, and low in the back of your head. Nonetheless, they are head tones. Now, when you get up for men, when you get to A4, you need to change your vowel. You'll want to get out of the covering. That is to say that your covered head tones, more or less, generally speaking, stop at G sharp. So, me, you'll stop covering on the G sharp, and on the A4, stop covering on the G sharp 4, and on the A4, you will modify the vowel and go to a splattier, brighter vowel. You'll get out of the A and move into something more A-like. Watch me now. If I go to the G sharp 4, see, that G sharp 4 was a little bit darker. It's a little bit more covered. The G sharp 4 is our last covered head tone. As we continue on, above A4, A sharp 4, B4, and of course tenor high C. All right. You notice the vowel that I'm phonating through from A4 up to tenor high C is a bit more of an A vowel. Now, just bear that in mind as you begin to succeed in your bridging and connecting training. You begin to pull out and get into your head voice. Continue with the darker vowel through E4 to G sharp 4 approximately, and once you get to A4, you're going to modify the vowel to something more A-like. That helps you to registrate and get a higher placement for these higher notes. So let's review real quick. In men, the chest voice tends to reside down here, up to about, we'll say, D4, D sharp 4. D4, D sharp 4, probably your last healthy certified belts. Your lowest head tone, generally speaking, is a D sharp 4 or an E4. From about D sharp 4 to G sharp 4, these are our low head tones. You're going to cover them, and the goal and the objective is to try to make those notes sound like a high chesty belt by twanging through dark vowels. Above G sharp 4, you have A4, and again at A4 and above, you'll begin to modify the vowel out of the darker A and into something more of an A to help you maintain and get good placement on these higher notes. The techniques that we use, the lift up, pull back, the covering, all these techniques we use to train the bridging and connecting that you see me doing and some of my male colleagues at TVS doing, we apply those to women, exactly the same techniques, but those all happen again around, for women, around B flat 4, B4, C5, and C sharp 5 and D5. So this is our little composition called The Most Difficult Notes. This is the video I want you to watch and understand exactly where that general region is that your chest voice ends and your head voice starts. And if you feel that when you're singing your low head tones, if you feel those are really difficult to sing, you're not alone. They're difficult for me too. They're difficult for everybody. The low head tones are the most difficult. The way you're going to get around that is build the strength of the twanger and increase your ability to compress, and you'll be fine. I hope that's helpful for you. Now let's get back to training.